It's the winter solstice. It's the end of the calendar year. And because of the darkness that's in our world right now, it's all about bringing light back. And I wanted to say this morning, hallelujah, the sun is returning, you know? Because for me, the sun is a really important part of nature. And one of the things I know from talks other people have given about pagan traditions is that it's a time, this winter time is a time to go within and sort of look at one's expectations and one's hopes and looking ahead as well as looking to the past. However, the media would have us think it's all about being busy, buying presents, getting together with great food, and that comes with a lot of stress. It comes with some pressure that we feel. For me, it's taken years to get to the point where I can look forward to both the stress and the opposite, having a Christmas by myself, going within and being okay with that, not feeling gypped as many people do. So this talk is about accepting life on life's terms. And because this is a season of stories, and there were some good ones in the paper today about people's Christmases, I wanted to tell you two stories I read recently about lives that were diametrically opposite, but both ended sadly. And I think part of the reason they ended sadly is because they didn't accept the 5 things you can't change. The first woman was a book called The Phantom of Fifth Avenue, which was about Huguette Clark, William Clark's daughter, who, if you read the papers, died in a hospital room after living there for almost 20 years. She was raised in privilege and wealth, and so one would assume that because of this privilege and wealth, she led a happy life. But that was not necessarily the case. The second was about a brilliant African-American man born into, sort of lower middle class, sort of on the edge of poverty. His mother worked, but she didn't make very much money. And he, because he was brilliant, had every opportunity to lift himself out of that and become something more, but eventually returned to his poor community, where he became an unemployed drug dealer and was murdered before the age of 30. I think both shared some flawed expectations about life with sad consequences. The daughter of William Clark, Huguette, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, William Clark made millions from mining in Butte, so she's kind of one of us. Some of you may have visited the Clark Mansion in Butte, and in fact, she spent very little time in Butte because her wealth and her societal position demanded that she go to the best schools and be in New York, where society lived. And so it was difficult for her, because of her privilege, to have friends. Her father warned her very early on, people will want to get close to you because of your money, not because of who you are. So what happened is she limited herself basically to trusting only her sister and her mother, and her father was too absent really to get close to. Unfortunately, her sister died when she was 17 years old. And so she lost that big part of her life that brought her out of herself. At that point, she turned to her dolls, which were her companions and comfort. And that continued to the day she died. That's who surrounded her in her hospital room. She was married briefly one time, and to somebody that was a friend of the family, so the family approved. but she really didn't know how to be intimate with anybody, and so she kind of was repelled by the whole thing. Being close to somebody physically, she really didn't have that in her life, and sex in particular was something she didn't understand at all. Nobody had bothered to teach her. The other story was titled The Short and Tragic Life of Robert Peace. His father, Skeet, wasn't employed, but made a living from dealing cocaine and other odd jobs. His mother, Jackie, worked in the food service industry and lived with her parents, who owned a house which they purchased when their neighborhood in Newark was primarily a white, sort of lower middle class neighborhood. As the years went by, however, she saw it transformed into a primarily black neighborhood and become a dangerous place to raise her child with the good values she wanted him to have. However, she fell in love with Skeet, Rob's father, and realized he was different from the guys around her because he seemed to know so much. He was just a font of information and knowledge, and that was intriguing to her. They had a child, but she never married him. She knew he dealt cocaine, not to the extent that he did, but she knew there was something going on, and she wasn't about to have her child exposed to that kind of thing. As it turns out, Rob, too, was very hungry for knowledge, and from an early age, he taught himself how to read. He started pointing to the childhood books that his mother read to him. And she saw that ability in him and decided she was going to make sure that he had a different kind of upbringing than the folks around him in that neighborhood. So she struggled and worked, lived with her parents, and spent most of her money putting him through parochial schools, which she felt were places he would get a better education. This paid off in the end. He ended up going to Yale on a scholarship that one of the endowers in the high school he went to, the private Catholic high school he went to, paid for. He really didn't want to go to Yale. He wanted to go to Johns Hopkins because it was in a neighborhood that was more familiar to him. If any of you have been to Baltimore, that neighborhood is kind of a ghetto of sorts. And he knew those people, felt comfortable around them, and knew that there was a higher proportion of African Americans there. But his mother took his application to mail on the last day it was due in the mail, and her boss demanded that she stay late, and she was unable to get the application in. She was so fearful of being fired that she had to stay and work, and he was rejected on that basis. He did go to Yale, and he did very well academically. The whites that he roomed with enjoyed having him around, but he had very little spending money because the money he got was for the schooling and not necessarily for the social activities that he wanted to participate in. So he started dealing drugs. Of course, a good, easy, fast way to make money, and he had all the connections. He also, though, took that money and began saving for going to South America, which he just had a fascination with. When those goals were accomplished after he graduated, instead of applying to graduate school, he wanted to help his mother financially in return for all the sacrifices she had made for him, and wanted to help. In the meantime, his father had been sent to prison for murder on a charge that nobody who knew him thought was accurate. He had never been a violent person, and so people who knew him knew he probably was not the person, but that he was framed somehow to take the blame. So he was in prison, and Rob wanted to help him get out. That was kind of his other goal. So he went back to the community in which he was raised after his travel had been accomplished. He dealt drugs for a while because he couldn't find a job, and then the school where he graduated from offered him a job as a teacher. And he taught there for about 5 years, but it just wasn't the intellectual challenge that he was looking for. And so he decided he and his friends would go into the real estate business, get rich fast, right? Buy a house real cheap, fix it up, and then start renting it. Well, in the neighborhood in which he bought it, and his mother warned him about this, it's very hard to collect rent. It took all his time and energy fixing it up and trying to collect the rent. The house became a money pit, which meant he had to find a job, and he got a job as a laborer for an airline, which was not a bad paying job in Newark. But he got careless one day, and because of his carelessness, a plane was damaged. So he was fired. About that time, his father had developed brain cancer, and he was obviously going to die. They weren't going to treat it, and so when he was offered several pounds of marijuana to buy, he took that and he used his lab experience to turn it into a more potent drug, which he thought would sell better, which he called sour. And so his goal was, okay, after my dad dies, I'm going to save all this money from selling this marijuana, and I'm going to go to graduate school. I'm going to get rich on this pot. These are, unfortunately, the rival drug gangs got angry at him and shot him before he was even 30 years old. So these are morality tales in a sense, and I know they are in their own ways depressing. It's not a very nice thing to think about at Christmas time. But I do believe both are examples of holding on to beliefs and expectations that don't follow the guidelines of the 5 things we really can't change. So let me go with Huguette first. One of the 5 things is pain is a part of life, and that includes emotional pain. Why did she live in the hospital? I believe that she felt more comfortable because if she was ever in physical pain or need, she was surrounded by people who were there to ease it. On the other hand, Rob was in serious emotional pain due to his mother's stresses, the loss of his father, his discomfort with the social setting in which he attended college, he started to use marijuana quite early in his life. He used that to ease some of the anxiety and pain that he felt. And in that neighborhood, given the stresses on them, that was the easiest, cheapest, most available way to do that. The second thing we can't change is life is not always fair. Rob had difficulty accepting his father's fate, which from all evidence was not fair. I think he also had difficulty accepting his own gift, which when he had grown up around others who he saw as very good people, deserving people, but who weren't as smart and didn't have the opportunities he had. I remember one time a friend telling me her mother always cautioned her not to get the big head. Anybody ever heard that expression? It was new to me, but it meant don't think you're better than those around you. Rob didn't want to think he was better than those around him. and therefore returned to his familiar neighborhood and his childhood friends. On the other hand, Miss Clark had such a cosseted life that she was hardly aware of how unfair life was to other people. She made little effort to use her money for good causes other than art that she really cared about. Even the hospital where she lived got minimal donations from her. She hung on to that money and in the end was convinced to give large sums to her private nurse and accountant and her lawyer as a payment for their loyalty. Things don't always go as planned. Rob had a get-rich off of real estate plan and get-rich off of marijuana plan. But as with many get-rich schemes, things did not go as he planned, and he lost his life as a result. I don't know what Ms. Clark's plan was. I think it was partly to do what was expected of her, like marry, but she had no concept of what that was like, having been so protected from real life. Even her parents and her older sister took care of her, and I think she expected somehow that to continue, for the people in her life to care for her. And so when that wasn't really available, when all the people that her parents had hired to take care of her started quitting or retiring or dying off, she couldn't think of any option but to go to the hospital. The next one, number 4, is people are not loving and loyal all of the time. I don't think she could accept a relationship that might not be loyal all of the time and face it. So and realistically, we all know that any friendship or family dynamic brings with it criticism and anger at times. I think she had little experience with dealing with that emotionally, so she paid her help for the loyalty and love she wanted to get. Her private nurse was asked to be with her 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And because she paid so well, the nurse agreed. Later, the nurse tried cutting back, but Ms. Clark offered her more money, and she relented, sacrificing the raising of her children and her relationship with her husband for the promised money. On the other hand, if Rob had been a little less loyal to his mother and father, and I hate to say this, and his homeboys, he might have gone to graduate school right away. He had very high standards for his own loyalty, which resulted in giving up giving up more self-serving opportunities. His mother didn't want him to come back to his neighborhood. She wanted him to go someplace else, but he was too loyal. And in fact, he, at one point, when he went on his trip to South America, he gave the money that he had saved from his drugs in college to a good friend of his father's and said, "Watch this." He packed it up in a trunk, and sure enough, when he came back, it was gone. So that was also a blow to him. The last thing we cannot change is that everything changes and ends. Families lose members and relationships change based on many factors. It's hard to lose parents, siblings, spouses, or even children, but we will lose them or be lost ourselves. Either way, it feels incomplete and sorrowful. Christmas often brings to mind those losses because those memories of Christmas tend to last. I remember well the last Christmas we had with my father. We had a wonderful time, laughing and coming together. So wonderful that when it came time for him to go, we were all in tears. Little did we know at that point that it would be our last Christmas with a living parent, my mother having died 10 years before. I take comfort in the fact that we appreciated it. We enjoyed it. And perhaps that's the lesson we need to keep in mind. Every single moment is to be savored and appreciated. I'm not sure we can do that as well if we are expecting to live lives free of some of these unchangeable truths. I chuckle to myself when I hear people making plans for their old age. It's not that it isn't good to make plans, but life often intervenes, and one needs to accept those changes in health and abilities with a measure of grace that says, I'm not in control here. I recently ran into a former colleague who lost his 23-year-old daughter to a rare and virulent form of leukemia, which usually occurs in Asian men in their mid-40s. So why she got it, he can't explain. He was frank in saying that, dealing with this is full of what ifs. What if we had done this? What if we had known earlier? What ifs? And he said, the thing that puts a strain on a marriage is not necessarily the guilt other people lay on you, it's the guilt you lay on yourself with the what ifs. And he said, the lesson I learned is that we have no iota of control over anything. We just tell ourselves that we do in order to deny the riskiness of our lives. Every beloved gift comes with the possibilities I've talked about today. I'm often accused of being a pessimist, and it's a mantle I wear willingly because I have seen and experienced the loss of these expectations. That my intimates and acquaintance will be here for life is not an expectation that I should have. That when I plan something and I'm determined enough, nothing can intervene. That people have control over how much pain they let into their lives. And that if I love somebody, they will love me back. We want so badly to believe those things, and part of our maturity is realizing how innocent and naive those beliefs are. So as we enter into this holiday, let's let go of expectations for ourselves and for others and choose to look instead at wanting what we have, at being grateful for being alive. To live life on life's terms is a gift that will bring greater happiness than trying to tweak and change what is there. I'm not saying I don't feel sadness, longing, betrayal, pain, chaos, etc. Rather, know that if your season occurs without some of those unchangeable factors, like an ending, a change in plans, unfairness, pain, and lack of love and loyalty, if it occurs without those things, you've had a wonderful holiday. Be grateful and joyous and sing Alleluia.